Try to remember the last car commercial you saw. What sort of images came out of it? Chances are there were a lot of shots of mountains, valleys, beaches, and other forms of nature. More than likely, that car was making a trip outside of the city if there was one. And if the car just so happened to be driving in the city, the roads were almost definitely empty. There's never any traffic, there are never any other people, just the driver, played by an attractive actor like Matthew McConaughey, the car, and endless space around them. Now try to remember the last train commercial you saw.
Here they come, clickety-clack down the track. It's lots and lots of trains.
Okay, let's do something else. Try to remember the last thing about public transportation you saw in any media ever.
It's lots and lots of trains.
This is the paradigm of transportation in the United States. Cars are cool, sexy, give people freedom. Buses, trains, and any type of mass transportation are dirty, underfunded, and filled with masturbating homeless people. This might seem like an obvious contrast given the two options, but consider this. The script is completely flipped in 90% of the rest of the world, especially in Japan. Transportation might seem like an arbitrary and pointless thing to focus on. In fact, given the amount of people that spend going from one place to the other in real life, it's rarely a focus of any story. Yet, if you think about the ubiquity of cars in American media versus the rails and animes, something seems different, and difference is what we're all about. So, what can the exciting world of public transportation tell us about our culture? Let's find out. Before the innovation of steam-powered locomotive, there was really only one form of mass transportation, being stowed below deck of a ship, which, by the way, lots of people died from that. If you wanted to make a trip from, say, New York City to Washington, D.C., before the mid-1800s, your best bet was using one of the earliest national highways, which sucked. But if you wanted to do this and you had the option of using a horse if you were wealthy, or if you were normal, walk. On the other hand, if you wanted to go somewhere away from the eastern seaboard, well, play Oregon Trail of the Cold Steel. I'm strictly very sorry about that. And you'll get why that's a bad idea. Japan's highway system was a bit more developed, but not by much. During the Tokugawa period, 1600 to 1868, the governors of different prefectures were expected to travel to Tokyo to pay homage to the shogun. In order to make this actually feasible, the Tokugawa government created a network road system that hit most of the major metropolitan areas. Even in this highway system only extended through central Honshu, or if you happen to live out in the boonies, you had a bit of a trek ahead of you. But the Industrial Revolution happened in the US around 1820 and in Japan around 1870. Instead of human, water, or animal power, machines began to run on steam, which was powered by coal, which yada yada everyone suddenly realized was great. If you wanted to do industry now, you did not need to be located near a body of water, so cities in the interior of the country, Chicago in the United States and Hokkaido in Japan, for example, began to develop large factories. Now, of course, you need large numbers of people to run factories, more than normally to live in a city, so urban planners figured out that they needed to make it easier for commuters to travel into and within cities. Hence, the creation of the national railway lines to promote safer and more efficient travel to urban areas. Both the United States and the Japanese governments heavily invested in the development of interstate transportation lines, and city governments also worked with the public bus and trolley systems. All while this was happening, Americans stumbled upon another source of energy: oil. Oil being much easier and less dangerous to transport over long distances than coal, it quickly took coal's spot as the chief power source behind generating electricity. It also made the innovation of the first automobiles possible and cost-effective. And, of course, once you have cars, you need places to drive them. Both Japan and the United States before, during, and after World War II created government-funded initiatives to expand infrastructure, mostly the revamping and expansion of national interstate highways. Most of the developed world had a fairly similar trajectory when it came to public transportation. with every country having their own special quirks, like, for example, I don't know, having a capital city firebombed in the middle of a war. But up to the 1960s or so, there are general trends that can be applied pretty much anywhere: Japan, Europe, and the US. So let's fast forward 60 years into 2020 and see how things compare today. Let's start with some big comparisons. The Tokyo metropolitan area is the largest urban centers in the world, with almost 38 million people living in it, and there are no metros in the United States that even come close. The largest, New York City, pales in comparison with a measly 20 million people. Fittingly enough, the Tokyo metro system is also the largest transit system outside of China. Every year, Tokyo Metro has about 2.7 billion. That's with a B. People riding it every year, many of them daily commuters. New York's subway system has a respectable 1.8 billion, and if you consider the riders in proportion to the population, it seems at first glance that New York actually has a more used transit system, except the second largest transit system in Japan is also Tokyo, specifically its Toei subway system, which hosts another billion passengers each year. When combined with Tokyo's Rinkai line, 90 million passengers, the Tokyo transit system rivals the largest transit system in the world. Beijing subways, 3.8 billion passengers a year. Sidebar, this is not counting all the more minor privately run railways that operate Tokyo or its extensive bus line. Moving away from the huge metro centers, in sheer numbers, Japan still has a more active transit population in its major cities than the United States does. The top 10 railed cities in Japan, not double counting Tokyo, outrank the top 4 US cities. Even when we compare apples to apples and put comparably sized metro areas against each other, the competition isn't even close. The last two are comparing cities to cities. Greater Osaka and over 4 billion annual passengers a year, and it constitutes not only Osaka but also Kyoto and Kobe. Comparing Greater Los Angeles to Greater Osaka is also comparable, both around 19 million in population. The Great Los Angeles Metro system, to the extent that one exists, does not pull high numbers. And bear in mind, this is all comparing Japan's population of 127 million to the United States' 327 million. No matter what level you compare the two, Japan outperforms the United States in terms of how many people use public transportation. And it's not even close. So you might think, okay, in order for the transit systems to be so large and sophisticated, they must be way more expensive than their counterparts. The answer is actually that they are about the same. A single ride ticket for New York subway is $3 flat. For Tokyo Metro, depending on distance, it's an upwards of 320 yen or $2.91, so roughly the same. There is no one-day pass for the New York subway, but the LA Metro day passes are $7 compared to Tokyo's unlimited pass 600 yen, which is roughly $5.45, or 800 yen, $7.26, using the Tokyo subway passes. A New York 7-day pass is $33, LA is $25. The Tokyo Metro does not have a 7-day pass, but it does have a 72-hour pass, about 1,500 yen each. And if you do the math, the cost of riding for 7 days proportionally would be about $31.78. This is, of course, avoiding the obvious solution of digital pass cards that you can reload per trip through your bank account. Overall, whether you're a tourist or a commuter, so long as you're smart about how you pay for the railways, the cost in each city is roughly the same. Okay, but Tokyo, again, is such a huge city with so many people using the transit system every day. If using public transportation costs the same, then it must be decrepit, constantly being worked on, slow, and overall just worse service. Again, no. Japanese rail operators say sorry for inexcusable departure 25 seconds earlier. Japanese transit is notorious for how punctual and efficient it is. People set their own watches and timers by the clocks at the train station. And as for speed and availability for transit in Tokyo, let's put up another example. Let's say you're a tourist in Tokyo. You decide to spend a part of your afternoon in Akihabara doing weeb shit. You go to a few maid cafes, you hit up an arcade in the area, so you go to Sega's headquarters or buy anime. You decide that you've had enough debauchery today and you want to go visit a shrine, so you want to make a trip to Shibuya's Hanazono Jinja Shrine and then take a 1-minute walk to eat some ramen at the robot restaurant. If you were to walk this trip, it would take you an hour and 22 minutes. You call a taxi or an Uber, it would only take about 7 minutes, but it would cost an upwards of $35. But you're smart. You have your Tokyo Subway Pass, and you catch the line down in Shinjuku for 200 yen. It only takes you 17 minutes, plenty of time to pray away your sin and get right with Jesus. Yes, I know, Shinto shrines don't worship Jesus. It's a joke. Shut up. Now, there's a huge blind spot that I haven't addressed. Welcome to this video. What if you don't live in Tokyo, or Osaka, or New York, or Los Angeles? What if you live in the countryside or a suburban area? Let's say you live in Hida, Japan. The location of Mako Shinkai is your name. Woo! Hida has a population of about 2,500 people, and its main industries are traditional sake production and craft works. In other words, jobs that go relatively nowhere. It's also located way out in the boonies, so it's not as if getting to a bigger city where there are opportunities is an easy thing. Luckily, Hida is located on a major Japan railway line, not to mention the major highways, so you could have some options. Unfortunately, those options suck. Getting to nearby Takayama is about 28 minutes by train, and each way costs 240 yen, $2.18, which is terrible. But since Takayama has only about 80,000 people, you will run into many of the same problems. Getting to the nearest city is a 2-hour, 30-minute commute by train, and it costs about $19 both ways. By car, it isn't much better at an hour and 20 minutes, but people make that commute because they have to. Public rails aren't the solution to everything, and I'm sure anyone who has used public transit understands. It comes with its own set of problems. Trains, buses, and subways are slower than cars. They have a strongly enforced speed limit, they are bound to only certain routes, and may not be the most convenient, and they involve some amount of trekking to get from one stop to the next. They're also crowded, with trains in Tokyo reaching to 150% of capacity during rush hour traffic. Trains are also not always the safest or cleanest environments, and particularly in Japan, they are not always the most disability accessible. And of course, since this is Japan, you all consume Japanese media. We need to talk about Jikan culture. Jikan is a Japanese word that basically means molestation. It has become an international buzzword to describe any act of public sexual harassment or assault in Japan. It's generally seen as a specifically Japanese phenomenon caused by a large part due to the overcrowding in Japanese public transit, as well as social norms that stress not making a scene in public. Women often feel that pointing out crime and the embarrassment that comes from publicly acknowledging it outweighs the damage of the crime itself. It has become such a notable problem that train stations put up signs specifically saying, "Don't be a fucking molester." And as of 2002, many lines were implementing gender-segregated cabs in trains. The problem hasn't really gone away since then, and at least partially because Japan hasn't really caught up with the rest of the world with the Me Too movement. The cultural expectations of women in Japan tend to encourage victim blaming in these situations. Not that it is much different from the discourse here in the United States right now. Let's turn back to our friends in Hida, Japan for a moment. There are hundreds, if not thousands of towns and cities in the United States containing millions of people in the exact same position. If you do not live in a major urban center, your economic opportunities are going to be severely limited. Hell, even if you live in a major urban center, you are still going to be behind the 8 ball. And even if you live 20 minutes outside of one, chances are that you have next to no access to public transportation. You can either walk or drive. Those are your options, and they're not much different from the horse-drawn carriages that we started this video with. Now, of course, the United States has a very well-developed interstate highway system, so at least there is more access to easy travel for people who have cars. But what if you don't have a car? Or better question, what if you can't afford a car? What happens if you are a person who is born in an impoverished family in a location where decent paying jobs are not within walking distance? Transportation emerges as crucial to escaping poverty. Access to transportation is the largest single factor in someone's ability to escape generational poverty. Not access to healthcare, not education, not even intelligence or positive role models, it's transportation. We could talk about the many benefits of well-funded public transportation, such as higher GDPs, lower carbon footprint, less traffic, overall cleaner cities. Those are all great. But at the end of the day, the real issue is that people can actually get to their work and provide for their families. This is a significant problem. The way people are able to move within society is one of the most telling things about what society values. 150 years ago, most people lived and died within 15 kilometers of where they were born. For poor people, either in a rural area with zero public transport or within an urban center with underdeveloped or overly expensive public transport. This might still be the case. The freedom of movement is a human right, acknowledged by the United Nations. The biggest obstacle to freedom of movement within a country's economic disadvantage, you cannot afford to move. If you cannot afford to move, you will not move. And in the United States, this is becoming a larger and larger part of the population. So why is there this big gap between the United States and Japan, and really most of the rest of the developed world, when it comes to public transportation? One reason is obviously that the United States is bigger. It's a huge continent, and Japan is 3 relatively small islands, but Los Angeles is much smaller than Osaka, and aside from Tokyo, there aren't any cities that are larger in landmass than New York. The public transportation is still better, so that's not all that there is to it. Another reason is that there is active lobbying campaigns by people in the oil industry and other relevant industries against the increasing government funding and infrastructure. This is obviously a big deal, but it's also just a synonym of a greater issue. What it really boils down to is that the United States has historically not been great at considering the public good over the individual good. Japan, for better or worse, is very common-orientated nation. They see themselves as part of a collective, with each individual having a role to play in the betterment of the community. The success of individuals relies on the success of the community. This also works in the negative. Japan sees that failing of individuals is a failure of the community. In order to find solutions to these failures, the community must act together. This is the opposite of the United States. Individuals are responsible for their own success. Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and all that. So when the problem of economic inequality comes up, the response differ drastically. Japan's society sees economic inequality as a problem that must be solved by the community through things like wealth taxes, better healthcare services, and investing money in public infrastructure. Why inequality is different in Japan, American society sees inequality as a logical conclusion of people being unequal. Why invest public funds in transportation when people can just buy cars? Why can't people just buy cars? Because obviously they don't work hard enough. Did you realize that throughout this video I used like 3 animes about cars? Initial D, Redline, and fucking Speed Racer. Without going into my anime list, name one other show that revolves around cars. I could have used 9 out of the last 10 big Hollywood blockbuster movies with car chase scenes. Remember the beginning of this video? In the US, cars are sexy and rugged, and so are people who own them. Public transportation is dirty, poor, and so are the people that use it. This is not to say that cars are bad, or even that car culture, auto shows, drag racing, and all that is stupid, but when you glorify those things and degrade anything else, what sort of culture are you actually breeding? When it comes down to it, the United States media presents cars as the only valuable means of transportation. Cars are expensive, but everyone has them, or at least they're supposed to, because that's what being American is supposed to mean. Weird, isn't it? So before I end today's video, I do want to actually note something that I had talked about earlier in this one, that it costs a lot to move. Me recently, about 6 months ago, ever since that whole fiasco both with YouTube and I was getting kicked out of the house, mainly because it was foreclosing or short selling, I was dealing with a lot at the time, and man, did I not have the immediate money in order to do it. I had to do a GoFundMe. And that's the thing, I don't think I should need a GoFundMe in order to go wherever I want within my world and within my country. The freedom of movement is such an important thing to humanity, and it's such an important thing to people that we need to be able to go where we want that we think might be best for us. The ultimate finite thing about it was how much it costed me in order to actually go from one place to another, and how much it cost me to get everything back, how much it cost me to get all my life back together, even though I had to leave so much of it behind. And once again, I had to ask my entire community to assist me in this endeavor. I genuinely do believe that the ability to go places and the ability to travel and that transportation is so important, but also public transportation is extremely important. People still have to be able to make their money, pay their bills, feed people, and especially during this time when we're all living in a pandemic right now, that is extremely important, that they are clean, that they are capable of being able to move massive amounts of people without having to get people infected. And also, safe travel is extremely important because, like I had noted, that Japan has this phenomena where very unsafe travel when it comes to public transportation is very real. By being complacent, we are allowing it to continue on, and by allowing it to continue on, we aren't facing the problems, and that just seems wild to me. We, humans, capable of change, are unwilling to change when it comes to these sorts of topics. But we have to actually look at the hard stuff. We have to look at the terrifying notion that these things exist. And that's all I really have to say. And like I said last time, I cannot thank my best friend, my co-writer, and somebody that has helped me make these videos that have just so much information and so much research behind them. Thank you again, Truth or Deal, for helping me write this and helping me produce it. It was such an amazing endeavor. I really cannot thank you enough, and I'm also so sorry how long this took to make. So that's pretty much all I got. If you guys want to check out my last video, or if you guys want to go ahead and check out any of the other videos that I do, then please, there will be a link at the end of this video and a bunch of links down below. And also, don't forget to love each other. I hope that we see you in the next video. See y'all later.